Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tinellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I make it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. This episode is brought to you by HarperCollins Australia. Listeners, if you haven't heard of the term romantasy, then I'd say don't feel bad, because up until recently I hadn't either. But it seems to be a term used more often than not of late to describe romance novels with an element of fantasy or magical realism, often featuring magical creatures or an element of enchantment to the romance. The combination of two highly popular genres and which characterises some hugely successful novels. Think Fourth Estate by Rebecca Yarros, A Court of Thorns and Ashes by Sarah J. Maas, and Australia's answer to this phenomenon in Tigist Gurma, who I interviewed recently, as well as my next guest author, Alexandra Almond. Now, Alexandra is a Melbourne-based author who, before turning her hand to writing, worked in a variety of roles, which included being a stable hand and a clown. But before we move to that, earlier this month, Alexandra's debut novel, Thoroughly Disenchanted, was published by HarperCollins Australia. And what a delightful, romantic, and despite its title, enchanting novel it is. It's about four friends, a cursed country house, and a weekend away that stretched over 100 years. And I'm so excited to have the chance to speak with Alexandra about her novel and journey to publication on the podcast today. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thanks, Claudine. Thank you very much for having me.
Congratulations on Thoroughly Disenchanted. You must be thrilled to see this novel out in the world.
I am so excited about it. I can't tell you. There's many highs and lows in an author's journey, but seeing your book on the shelves in a bookstop, that's a high. That's a really big high. And I'm so excited about it all. It's been such an amazing journey. Loving every minute.
Yeah, speaking of the long road, I wondered if you could tell me how long the gestation period for this novel was.
It depends when you start counting. The gestation period for how long I've been writing, I first started writing fiction maybe 7 years ago, and Thoroughly Disenchanted is my 6th full-length manuscript. So we're calling the first 5 practice novels, and it takes a lot of practice to get any good at this. And it's not like I just sort of wrote them and then put them under the bed. I wrote them and was trying to get published and trying to find people who are interested in them, and realized very quickly that I needed to learn how to write better. And so attended a lot of conferences, a lot of courses, a lot of training, got a lot of feedback till it finally got to the point that someone was interested in Thoroughly Disenchanted. In terms of this particular novel, I probably started writing it 3 years ago. And then 18 months ago, it's close to 18 months ago that we got the deal with HarperCollins. So that's how long it takes for me. It's probably 18 months to get a book written and then another 18 months in the publishing journey.
That's amazing. 18 months is a long time between sort of signing and then seeing your book out in the world.
And I believe that's pretty quick. I have another friend who's on a similar journey, and she actually got a contract before me, and her book isn't out until May. So yeah, can take even longer.
People out there don't truly understand how slow the world of publishing really does move.
That's right. So if you're writing something that is really relevant and topical today, it might not be by the time it's out in the world if you're going through a traditional publishing route.
Can you tell me a little bit about what that journey to publication was like for you? Had you shopped it around a lot? I mean, how many drafts did you go through? Was it a painful process, given that it was the last one in a long line of unpublished manuscripts?
So this was it takes me about 12 months to write a full-length manuscript, and I got this down in 12 months. It actually came out quite easily. It wasn't too difficult to write. It was a bit of a change of genre for me, and I found that really sort of exciting and interesting. And I'd also figured out what works for me in terms of writing. So the actual producing the manuscript worked really well for me. And I decided that I was going to invest in some editing. So I actually paid to get a structural edit and then a copy edit before I showed it to anybody. So that's what the next sort of 6 months was actually polishing it up to be the best that I thought it could be. And then I also decided to go down the route of trying to find an agent rather than going directly to publishers with this one. And I was just lucky enough. I pitched to 2 agents, and actually both of them wanted it. So it was actually quite a quick process, whereas with all of the other manuscripts, it had been, a long journey trying to find someone who was interested, going through publishers and agents. And this one, it really happened quite quickly from the moment I was finished and said, yep, I'm ready to go, and landed with Abigail Nathan at Alex Adsett Literary. And we did a little bit more tweaking of the manuscript before we went out to sort of our first list of publishers, and HarperCollins picked it up almost immediately. It was just one of those sort of strings of luck that seemed to happen. I hit Abigail at the right time. She's relatively new as an agent, and this is exactly her genre. So she loved it. And Anna Veldinger at HarperCollins, she said it was at the bottom of my list of TBR pile, but it sounded intriguing, so I read it and it was perfect. Literally, Abigail had said to me when we sent out the manuscripts to the first round of publishers, and she said, okay, cool, this is going to take many, many months. You just need to stop thinking about that and write the next book. And then 2 weeks later, she got back to me and said, you're not going to believe this. we've got an offer. So it was so quick after, many, many years of not having any luck or any interest to suddenly go to, oh, okay, cool. Now we've got interest and things are happening. It moved really quickly and it was amazing.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. And I'm sure there are many writers out there who can resonate with your story, Alexandra. And I guess the takeaway for many of us is don't give up.
Yes. Yeah. Don't give up, and keep trying and keep getting better. And yeah, it'll happen one day, hopefully. Look, don't estimate how much luck plays into this as well, like the right story at the right time with the right people. Yes, I put a lot of work into getting better at my writing, but Thoroughly Disenchanted is a really new genre for me. My first 5 manuscripts were romance or women's fiction. They were really quite different. And so then playing into this cozy fantasy space, cozy romantasy space at the time when romantasy, like when I was writing it, I'd never heard of romantasy. It really wasn't a thing. And then suddenly it's out there, and I'm, I luckily hit the popular trend thing that's coming good at the moment. The other thing too is that you talked about romantasy at the start, and this is cozy romantasy. So a lot of the romantasy that is out there is really sort of big fantasy world building, dragons and, amazing things. This is cozy fantasy. This is real world with a little bit of magic, and it's not going to be Game of Thrones where everybody dies.
Absolutely. And we'll get to talk all about that. Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's not quite in the same vein. I wondered if you could tell me about getting that call when you actually realized that someone was interested in publishing this.
That was amazing. I talked a bit about the highs and lows, and that first call that actually we genuinely have someone interesting. My agent actually texted me. She's texted me to say, I think you should read your email, with lots of exclamation marks and smiley faces. And then we got on the phone and had a chat, and it's really hard to believe. Like, it's a surreal experience. So many years of not having that, and then to actually have that is really, really magical, really, really surreal. And I also then had to get straight onto a friend who I never, like, I'm not a phone call person very much. I don't like talking on the phone. It's all about the texts. And I rang Kate, and she actually left an important meeting because she thought something dreadful must have happened because I was calling her, not texting her. Yeah, so it's amazing. I was going to say there's no feeling like it, but actually there's several of those moments along this journey. That's one of them. Is a good one.
Alexandra, you've had an eclectic working career, and I wondered, has that helped or hindered your road to publication, do you think?
Oh, I think it's absolutely helped. All of us as writers are writing from our own experience in one way, shape or another, the things that you bring to your characters and the storylines and the world around you. So having a diverse career up until this point, and working with and having friends among a whole lot of different types of people and in different industries, I think that's all really helped as well. My current day job as a human-centered designer, it's all about understanding people and designing systems and things, processes that work for people. So I feel like that really feeds into my understanding of characters and how people are complicated and nothing's ever simple and nobody ever fits into a bucket is also a really useful tool for writing. Playing Dungeons and Dragons, helped as well.
Talking about complicated people, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about this story.
Yeah, I'd love to. So, Thoroughly Disenchanted has four friends. So, there's four main characters here. Oliver is the point of view character, and Oliver is a absolutely delightful person. Actually, the best way I can describe Oliver to start with, the germ of this story actually came in a discussion with my writers group around how problematic fairy tales are, including the ones that we absolutely loved as children. And what would happen if the hero who had a curse put on them didn't turn out to be a bastard? What would happen? So that was the germ of this story, and that's the germ of Oliver's character. Is he is a hero who is under a curse and is refusing to be an awful person. He's refusing to make the curse anybody else's problem but his own. And so he's working through that. And there's elements within this where he actually, by being that person, he's stuck there with Genevieve, who's also stuck at Riverswood Manor with him. And that is causing her problems because he's refusing to be active and act in a way that she would do just about anything to get out of there. And she doesn't care. She's a much more pragmatic character and got a little bit, probably a bit more meanness in her. Completely understandable, and like, she is a lovely person and she cares about her friends, but the fact is she is not coping with being stuck there for 100 years. Oliver, he's a bit of a homebody. Like, he likes growing his own veggies and looking after the animals and cooking for everybody and looking after everybody. And so, they're in very different places, having been stuck there for 100 years. And then the other two characters are Finn and Ella. So Finn is a friend from 100 years ago who, for reasons, has been able to come and go during that 100 years. So he's sort of kept them in touch with the real world. And Ella, who is a new visitor who comes along on a storm night. They get visitors on storm nights at Riverswood, and Ella is a new visitor. They've never met her before, but she quickly becomes sort of one of the family and throws everything up in the air. Everything that they've known to expect over 100 years turns into a bit of a mess when Ella arrives, in a good way.
Absolutely delightful. Now, the thing about fantasy novels that both intrigues and bewilders me in the best of ways is the intricacy of the world building. Now, I know that you said before that yours isn't like, A Court of Thorns and Ashes, in that it's cozy and it's real world, but there is still quite a bit of world building in this book. You've created this world in Riverswood Manor, a world that Oliver and Genevieve have lived in for more than 100 years, with its idiosyncratic features and mystical characteristics, something that they're at pains to try and understand. So I wondered, Alexandra, how did you go about bringing this world to life on the page?
I started writing it and it grew. So I'm not a plotter who needs to know everything in advance and then write to that. So I very much started with an idea and then see how it went. And like you say, the magic that exists at Riverswood, that grew and it actually constantly changed. So the magic that I first envisaged was very different to the way that it's ended up playing out. As I kept telling the story and kept realizing the things that the magic could do. And to be honest, I didn't actually figure out the motivation for the magic until probably the second version of the novel. Like, I'd finished it and then I went, you know what, this is not working because, and went back and actually fed in all of the things that needed it to make sense for the magic to be the way that it is. So yeah, so it started from a little kernel of an idea of what that might look like, and it grew from there. Had some really lovely moments where I would come up with the idea that this is a benevolent magic and it just wants to make things better for people. And so I messaged my group of writers friends and said, what sort of things would the magic do if it was just trying to make your life in the household better? And they just came up with this incredible list of beautiful things that happened that were just really nice. So managed to put most of them in along the way. So just things like, you can always find the can opener, the first drawer that you look in, or tea towels always ready and dry, whatever you need it, that sort of thing.
Were there any books or work that inspired the world of Riverswood, or any special research that you did?
Didn't do any special research. I would have to say, as a child growing up, I absolutely loved the Billabong books by Mary Grant Bruce. I don't know if you know them. They were written in the early 1900s, set in country Victoria. They're my favorite books. I still have them on the bookshelf. I wanted to be Nora. I wanted to have grown up on a cattle station in 1910. That was exactly what I wanted to be. So Riverswood Manor does absolutely have the elements of Billabong is sort of there in the background as the basis for it. Everything else, like the magical element of it, is all not really based in anything. Do have a funny story about the gates. So the gates at Riverswood play quite an important symbolic role in the story, and
Yes.
they're really well described. And I had visualized them really, really clearly. And I'm not necessarily a visual person usually, but I could see these gates, and they were big, wrought iron, dark gates, really, really tall with fancy bits on the top. They had blue stone pillars and a fence for about 6 feet. We're talking imperial because this was 100 years ago. And then there was a wooden paling fence going around the boundary other side of that. Was heading out camping with my family last year out past Mansfield, and we drove past these gates. Literally just screeched at my sister to say, you need to pull up. I need to get a photo of these gates. And so yeah, and I took a photo, and it's like, I genuinely don't know if I'd seen them before and that was what was in my mind, but I definitely didn't remember that. And then when I took the photo and then opened the book to the page of that description, and she was like, oh, that's Riverswood.
That is amazing. Maybe there was something subconscious happening there that you'd seen at some point, and then when you were thinking about Riverswood, this kind of like came up. But that's just incredible.
It is. I'm actually really tempted to drop a copy of the book in, head out that way and drop a copy of the book in the mailbox and say, yeah, just thought you'd know that you weren't exactly an inspiration, but somehow your gates have ended up in my book.
Imagine their surprise.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess that feeds really well into my next question, which was Riverswood inspired by a particular place? Now, we've heard about the gates, but Riverswood itself, was it inspired by a particular place that you'd been to?
Not by a particular place. Like I said, Billabong in terms of the country cattle property. I grew up in Bendigo in central Victoria, and there are bluestone places. We used to call them haunted houses, on the road. You'd see them off to the side of the road as we go past. So, that was kind of in the back of my mind as we were doing that, but I've never actually visited any of them. It's largely invented.
Now, the magic and the curse over Riverswood was a complex thing for the group to come to grips with, but with Ella's arrival, they approach it like an escape room. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that and how you applied it to the story and in helping Oliver and Genevieve in their quest.
For the first 12 months of this book's life, it was actually called the 100-Year-Old Escape Room. So the escape room was originally, like, that was sort of the theme of the book. And yeah, the idea that Ella would come in, Ella is very fresh and new. So she is the catalyst for the change that happens. They've been there for 100 years. They've kind of got a little bit complacent about being there, and nothing they've worked has tried, but to be honest, they're not necessarily trying new things anymore. And she comes in with these whole new ideas and thinking about things like an escape room. I don't want to give away too much of the plot. I don't think the escape room ideas necessarily help them to escape, but the idea that you can think about this in a different way to the way you have been and actually make things happen rather than wait for them to happen is a sort of a fundamental theme of what Ella is bringing into this. They have a bit of fun with all of the things that they're trying.
She definitely brings in a really fresh perspective to a very, I guess, frustrating situation for them.
Yeah, very fresh. And Genevieve and Oliver are sort of after she's been there for a day and they're having a moment sort of alone and they're looking at each other and going, I wonder if we should have been talking about this more over the last 100 years, just because she is bringing in very fresh perspective and a new way of thinking about things. And at the same time, really respectful and caring of them and who they are as well. So it's not like she's throwing it all on the head and throwing them out the window as well. She's fitting into their lives, but just getting them to turn around and look at things differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I wondered if we could talk about romance tropes for a moment. Romance writing is full of tropes, and readers have come to expect a few at least in every book. So I wondered if you could tell me about the tropes in Thoroughly Disenchanted, and were they uppermost in your mind as you were writing?
Friends to lovers is an obvious one. This is very much about friends, and found family is another. They weren't uppermost in my mind. I don't see it as a traditional romance really. So it doesn't follow the beats of a traditional romance. There's absolutely romance there, and it hits the romance criteria that there is a happy ending and that the relationship is a critical part of the plot and where they're coming to. But it doesn't hit the traditional romance beats. The romance that I originally intended, let's be honest, was Oliver and Genevieve. That was where we were going, and Genevieve wouldn't play. She was not going to be a part of that because she just needed out so badly. It didn't go where I intended it to, and so part of that is the reason the tropes weren't it was always going to be friends to lovers, but it played out in a slightly different way. I like tropes, and forced proximity is probably another trope that we're playing, but it's in a little bit of a different context to usual. So yes, I like tropes, but I probably like playing with them as well.
I wondered if we could talk about Oliver and Genevieve a little more in the context of their sexuality.
Yes.
Um, Something I'm interested in is the fluidity of their sexuality. And over their 100 years of enforced confinement, they've been lovers, but also taken other lovers, but also not confining themselves to the opposite sex per se. And I wondered why that was important to these two as characters.
Mm. I think one of the things that I wanted very much for Genevieve and Oliver, who'd been stuck at Riverswood for 100 years, was that they were determined not to be stuck 100 years ago. So they have been eager that whole time for what's going on in the world outside. What am I missing? What's happening? And were keeping up with that any way that they could. And part of that was trying to make sure that they weren't stuck mentally as well, that they were mentally and engaged in what was going on in the world and thinking about things and questioning things. The fact then friend Finn was gay, openly gay, at a time when that wasn't as common as we would know today, but he had been there and had been sort of opening their mind to that world of there is a different way to exist sexually from a very early days. And then the fact that they really were limited in their choice of romantic partners to whoever turned up, and just being open to whatever over those 100 years. I feel like that is something that is really important to me personally, that we are open to what the world is changing and the way that we should be or could be thinking about things. I read an author talking the other day about their books, their old books, and books that they were embarrassed about, things they were embarrassed about having written 20 years ago. In 20 years, I want to be embarrassed about something I've written today, because that means I've moved on. And I actually really like that as a concept, that the things that we know about today, yeah, sure, they will age, and that's actually okay, so long as you recognize that and move on with them. So yeah, I wanted to bring that in and to say, just because you're 120 years old doesn't mean that you need to have the mindset of 120 years ago.
I love that. And I agree with you. Books that were written 50 years ago obviously were written with a particular societal and cultural context. And so it would be inane to think that that stays the same and that we're
Yeah.
writing the same as we do 50 years ago. So I really love the way that you think. Thanks for that, Alexandra. You mentioned earlier that this book was written from Oliver's point of view. And I wondered about that. Was that always your intention? Did he come out strongly as the point of view character?
Yeah, he did. It was my intention. I prefer single point of view stories. I know traditionally in romance it's very common to have dual point of view, so you see the opposite side of the romance. I personally prefer the single point of view because it allows you to get deeper into one character and to really understand that character and where they're coming from, and also that they don't know everything. Like, they don't know what other people are thinking or why they're behaving in the way that they are. That's a personal preference of mine. I was always going to start with Oliver as the point of view character because he was the germ of the idea, was this character who was not going to let himself be changed just simply because he had a curse put on him. So he was always going to be that point of view character. And I never actually got around to writing anything from anybody else's point of view. Tried a couple of times Genevieve's perspective. But then when it turned out that there were the four friends who realistically are all playing pivotal roles and all very much the same, it's like, I don't want four, I'm not going to have four point of view characters. And I feel like if I was just to choose one other, then that gives them a stronger role in the story. And actually it's kind of equal leads. So it worked.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, there was some dark magic at play in the spell that meant Oliver and Genevieve were trapped at Riverswood, which is the central dilemma of this story. But there's something within them that they need to uncover to help them understand how they can break the curse, isn't there?
I do think that this is probably true of any magic story. It shouldn't just be about the magic. It's not just about the spell. It's not just about getting the potions right and saying the right words. You actually have to change or grow yourself or reach some form of new understanding in order to defeat the thing that is causing you a problem. And so both of them needed to grow and to change and to think about things in a very different way in order to defeat the spell and to come out the other end.
Alexandra, if there was one thing that you would like readers to take away from this book, what would that be?
What I'd like people to take away from it is that what happens to you doesn't define who you are or how you have to behave. All of the characters in this book, all four of them have had things happen to them, and they all deal in very different ways. But ultimately, it is their choice, and coming to recognize what's important to them in that is what really matters.
Alexandra, you're a member of Romance Writers of Australia, as am I. And I wondered if you thought that being a member of the RWA was important to your journey to publication, and if so, why?
I don't reckon I would be here today if it wasn't for RWA. So it was the very first organisation that I learnt about in terms of writing. So I had a manuscript assessment on my first novel, and that assessor said to me, you should join RWA because they do this fantastic conference and they're just a really good group of people. And she was 100% right. So I went along to their conference that was in Melbourne in 3 months after I'd just had that assessment. It was a little bit confronting, that first one, with all of these people who knew so much about what they were talking about. And I pretty much just sat at the back of all of the talks and workshops and didn't really engage that much. There's such an amazing group of mainly women who are so focused on helping everybody get better and achieve what they want to achieve and learn to write. Being at the conference, it's such a great vibe and it's really supportive, and you don't often get that in scenarios where people are often competing with each other. And you could say that we're all writers and we're competing with each other. They've very much got this whole lift everybody up attitude and belief. The courses are amazing. The support through Facebook groups and online, the pitching opportunities. There's so much that they do. The competitions as well. Competitions are fantastic because you get great feedback on your work and an opportunity to read and see what other people at similar groups are doing. Romance Writers Australia is not the only organisation that I'm a part of. I'm also a part of the Queensland Writers Centre and Writers Victoria and Australian Society of Authors, hundreds of them actually, because I think it's so important to connect to people who are doing like-minded things and to learn as much as you can. So many short courses and conferences and bits and pieces. I think it's really important that you find your tribe, to be honest. I think it's important that you find people who can help you and who you can learn from. Through one of the courses that I did, which I think was through Writers Victoria, it was a 6-month program where each month you put writing in and got it critiqued by someone, but actually everybody else critiqued it as well. So it was both challenging but also amazing. And I found a group of 6 writers through that who we have our own writers group where we now meet once a month. So we've been doing that for the last 3 or 4 years. And that has been absolutely incredible. I have this wonderful group of friends and fellow writers who are on the same journey. And if I could give one piece of advice to budding writers, it would be to find your tribe and find the people who will support you and help you to get better and be there for you along the journey.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Alexandra. And I completely second the comments that you made in respect of RWA. And very much like you, my first couple of conferences were very much fade into the background and just let it all wash over me because it can be a little bit overwhelming. But once you really get to know people in the organisation, it is a wonderful support mechanism for so many up and coming writers.
Yeah, it really is.
You've already given us lots of tips there, but I wondered if you could offer another couple, what would they be?
One of them would be there is no right way to write. All of the experienced authors will have their things that work for them and their tips and tricks and all that sort of stuff. And that might work for you and it might not. And so some people need to set aside time every day to write, and other people just can do it in minutes snatched from somewhere else. Some people are plotters, some are pantsers, some do something different every day depending on what's working. There is no right way to do this, and there'll be a lot of people who tell you, I've got the answer, here are my character sheets, they will make your novel, and that's great, and maybe they will work for you. And so my suggestion would be find out as many different ways to do things, as many different ways to write as you possibly can. Try them all out and figure out what works for you, because it won't be the same as anybody else.
Now, I wondered if we were going to see Genevieve and Oliver again.
I hope so. I hope so. I have actually written another novel that is two of the characters 12 months later in a different setting. I'm sort of polishing that up at the moment, and maybe, we'll see the world of publishing as it is. HarperCollins has first right of refusal, so I guess if Thoroughly Disenchanted goes well, there's a very good chance they might want to do this. It is a standalone novel, but it is two of the same characters, so you may see them again.
Oh, fantastic. I look forward to learning more. Alexandra, it's been so much fun chatting to you today about this terrifically unique and fun book. It's the perfect summer read, in my opinion. And I wanted to say thank you for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Thank you, Claudine, for having me.
That's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please drop me a line via my webpage at claudinetinellis.com, via Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Alternatively, consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. Until next time, happy reading.